Hello, my name is Aoife Dean and this is the Happy Weight Podcast. Today I am lucky enough to have my friend Katie here with me. Katie is a health and life and sustainability coach. She's also my buddy on a master's we're both doing in nutritional medicine in the University of Surrey. And Katie came to visit me one day and we were chit-chatting for hours, and then afterwards I was like, oh damn it, why didn't I record that at all? It would have been amazing for the podcast. So Katie's super interesting, and hello Katie, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Super interesting, no pressure.
No, but you had a lot of information on the fact that just the fact that we're part of nature, and that it makes sense that our bodies are in cycles, especially women, we're in a monthly cycle, or just obviously the seasons of the year, and that kind of our nutrition and our eating, it would kind of make sense if there was if it matched. Exactly.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what we were talking about before. It was very funny, and but I think it's about, our society on loads of levels is so disconnected from nature. We eat the same thing all year round. We import it from around the world. We have the same activity all year round. We're just as extroverted and, doing loads. We do the same exercise. We eat the same thing. And, that's not sustainable. And there's a great book, I think I was talking about it the last time, The 4 Season Solution. And he really talks about how, we should be living, summer is the time where we're really active. We eat loads of carbs, there's loads of fruit on the trees. There's loads of sugar available in nature to fuel,
the early mornings and the late evenings.
Yeah, long days off, burning energy, meeting loads of people, busy, getting stuff done, And then as you come into autumn, what's available in nature changes. We start winding down. You start having your final harvest, wrapping up big activities. And then you start coming into winter and you start reducing your social circle, changing what you're eating, changing, you're not out on long treks all day. You might be more short-term lifting or, different kinds of exercise as well. And then you start plotting, what you're going to do next year. It's a time for reflection. And then you start coming out into spring and you start sowing your seeds, literally and figuratively, of what your plan is for the active season. Then summer, again, you start preparing. And, he makes a really good point that we're living in a chronic summer.
Yeah.
We haven't taken a break ever. It's just non-stop, and it's just not... It's not the way we should be living.
I think it's crazy though, because it's just not as in I consider it now, I get it now, but especially in my 20s, I don't think that's something that I would have considered at all. And also say I don't know, say if you like spinning, you're doing spinning 3 mornings a week all through the year.
Yeah.
And it's
juice diets every day, no matter whether it's January or July, it doesn't matter, you're having the exact same thing.
Exactly. And what I thought was so interesting about everything that you were saying is because respecting that you're part of a cycle, and respecting that basically it's not all up to us. We don't have the right answers on everything. We're part of a planet, and we're part of seasons and cycles and all the rest of it. It's actually the polar opposite of disordered eating, because disordered eating is that there's a right or wrong. I decide that I should do this, I shouldn't do this. I should get up at 7 every morning and exercise, hell or high water, whether I'm on my period or not on my period, sick or not sick. Do you know what I mean?
Pissing rain outside and freezing cold.
Exactly. And sure, then you're just really going against the grain, and that's what makes it all so hard. And so that's why I kind of think this is just a much smoother kind of way to look at it, isn't it?
And I think it's it's more intuitive, or it should be, when we allow ourselves, that the more we're in tune with the seasons, the more that's how we want to be. I do find, since I kind of naturally stepped out of the chronic summer, I got an autoimmune condition which kind of just put the brakes on, and it made me really realize how all go it was, and I didn't want that anymore. And he talks as well about, that when you realize you've had a chronic summer and you decide to stop, you might actually need a chronic winter for a while, before you're able to come back into that cyclical rhythm. And I definitely found for me, I wouldn't have put those words on it, but it described it so well. Like I just stopped, hibernated a little bit, kind of went inside a little bit, did a lot of reflection, much more gentle exercises, more intuitively eating. And then now I'm kind of back out in the rhythm, and I love like spring. I'm not, like even January, everyone's like, get fit, do your exercise, join the gym. And I'm like, I'm not ready.
Are you sure
it's still
about
winter,
that? Exactly.
Like Christmas
really?
is mental. I'm not like, I actually need a break.
I've hit my
still
word
learning
count.
out.
I need to be a mute hermit now for 2 weeks.
Exactly, yeah. And then it's more about maybe like by February, I'm kind of like, I'm excited about ideas, rather than doing, so I might be like, oh, maybe this year I might sign up for this, or I might start researching stuff I might like to do, or and you kind of start sowing the seeds, of ideas, and then you might be kind of ready for it by spring,
exactly,
or summer.
And that's why I kind of think that, like, do you know, like, I think if you were in any way hippie-ish at all, you could kind of say that, like, maybe COVID was meant to be, or maybe there were some benefits, because I just know from talking to clients anyway, or just people in real life too, everyone, that, everyone would say that they were really firing on all cylinders before COVID hit. Like, and like people's travel was bananas, their schedule was bananas. And like, I do think there was a little bit of relief when you got to, in kind of that March time or whatever, you got to just do nothing. And like on Saturdays, you could close the curtains and watch telly all day, and you were saving lives, Yeah. Time to be alive. But like, everyone just like, there was a bit of a like, whew, like a bit of an exhale, like,
totally. Because I said it to a friend, I was explaining this kind of concept, and she was like, isn't it amazing the pandemic was basically a chronic winter, like enforced on the planet, and I was like, it actually was. And I do think a lot of people took stock and maybe
change things.
Maybe being a bit more cautious coming and, opening up, that I think people are maybe being a bit more careful about what they reintroduce, which in a way is kind of starting to become aware of that, living intuitively,
and cycles with rhythms and stuff. Exactly. Because even, moving on to another job, even sometimes I think people, some people, I'd say a lot of people actually realized a romantic relationship wasn't for them, or some friendships weren't for them. Like,
and
there
was work. I mean, the amount of clients I have where it's, stress at work and then combining that with stress at home, and then throughout the pandemic, I think people have just reevaluated, like, hang on a minute, this isn't, sustainable in the long term. Like, I need a change. And, so many people changing jobs, changing boundaries in relationships, and, changing, maybe asking for help more from family, friends, kind of just, I think it's great.
Knowing your limits and stuff. And then nutritionally, like I can kind of think of some examples, like, I suppose, the timing of blackberries coming out in Ireland is perfect, because it's just before you're going into, like, autumn, winter, and the flu season. So you're like, just literally vitamin C is growing all around you. You can't miss it.
Totally.
And like, and then I suppose the other example I always think about is that, like, in some ways, and I know we can import stuff and all the rest of it now, but, in the Mediterranean diet, best of luck to them with their olives and all their, like, amazing fruits. Yeah, exactly. But up here in Northern Europe, it's like, we don't get any vitamin D between September and March. So it's like, it's not a major coincidence we're all about the butter and the cream and the meat and stuff. Do you know what I mean? That's not just like a weakness or a willpower thing. No. That's, that's kind of, I don't know, pre-decided or suitable or something, do you know?
Yeah, like, there's been loads of really interesting studies, and I mean, probably not enough either, but they make sense, logically and intuitively for me anyway, that they've studied loads of different diets all over the world, of, indigenous people, and they're all inherently healthier than we are on a Western diet. And when they introduce a Western diet into those societies, they all end up with Western diseases like heart disease, cancers, things like that. And when they remove the Western diet and they go back to the way they were before,
doing,
they're all healthier. And like, there's no common denominator, you know. There's like Inuits eating, you know, blubber and meat and fat and fish all, you know, for 6 months of the year. And then there's people vegan diets, there's people on you know, nuts and seeds one part of the year, and loads of maybe meat another time of the year. There's just every single, like the Mediterranean diet, but
every single combination of food, basically.
Yeah. So like any diet could work in the right instance, you know, the right circumstances. I think it's that, you know, the common denominator is that they're all eating seasonally, they're all eating locally, they're eating traditionally as well, which I think is a key one, and they're eating in community, you know.
It's all those huge other factors, isn't
so like
it?
we've in the Western diet, we've forgotten all of those things.
It's not like eating
we're
at
like,
your computer
avocados,
on your own.
you know, avocado and toast. I mean, I'm, you know, up for that as much as I do love avocados, but I'm trying not to because, like, you know,
you can't go back.
Like as far from seasonal and local as you could get, you know. And I suppose they're huge factors that are really important to remember. And like, you know, even when you think like Ayurvedic kind of ideology or, you know, theory is that, you know, that there's like an energy that goes into food, and then when you eat that, you're getting, you know, it's not just nutrients.
You know?
I
love that kind of way of looking at it.
Yeah, and like how the food is cared for and how that impacts the food and how it nourishes you.
I think that's,
you know,
so true even for like chefs loving their work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, or someone loving their cooking.
Grow on it, like
you can kind of like, I think there's something to that, like.
Yeah, and you know, if you consider like, you know, the soil, you know, like there was it might be a Michael Pollan book or something, but he says it really well. Like he was basically trying to explain, you know, that like he calls it nutritionism.
Oh yeah.
So, versus a nutritionist. So, you know, it's like understanding the nutrition of food is obviously really important, and it's allowed us to understand, you know, anemia and like B12 deficiencies and loads of things like that, you know, scurvy, whatever. But we can kind of over-analyze that. And he was saying, you know, like back whenever kind of, you know, we're at the kind of founding of, you know, massive conventional agriculture, they discovered that there's 3 main ingredients, you know, that are needed as fertilizer. And they just identified those 3, and they were like, that's it now. Brilliant. We know how it works. You know, it's like, it's really arrogant of humans to think that we know better than nature. But anyway, we're like, we got it. Here's the formula. These 3 things, stick it in the soil and you get loads of crops. And then they took the same and they were like, okay, nutrition wise, there's 3 things, you know, fat, carb and protein, done. As long as everybody gets those, they're sorted. And then they started getting scurvy and loads of other things. They're like, hang on a minute.
There's more
than these 3 things. Yeah. There's vitamins, they're vital. Amines, you know, they're vital to human health. And then they're like, but now we know exactly what it is. Take a multivitamin, fat, carb, protein, you're sorted. And then they're like, oh no, actually there's phytonutrients, you know, it's kind of the latest kind of buzz thing, you know. And
so we'll just keep continuing.
Are there? You know?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what the master is really teaching me, is that we don't have a notion.
Same here. And really, it's like, so for me, it like the more we know, the more we don't know.
Exactly.
And to me, that means don't mess with a system that's evolved to work. You know? And it's arrogant of us to think that we can. So like, as much going back to basics as we can, like traditional food preparation would have been soaking, fermenting, you know, grains and legumes, and that allows us, like, first of all, it makes them more digestible, and it also makes them more nutritionally absorbable or available to us, you know. Whereas now we're in, like, you know, mass production. We're like, oh, pressure cook them, you know, they'll be grand, stick them in a tin, and, you know, like, everyone will be grand. And then we're all sick, like, and we wonder why. And it's just like, and like, obviously it takes time to do things traditionally.
Yeah.
But we do need a balance. We still live in this world that's built quite fast paced and everything. But
I think that arrogance as well, like, people do have it, you know, just about, say, what our grandparents, you know, ate, or the nice things that they liked, or, you know, I think my granny, you'd always eat the bacon fat. You know what I mean? And it's like, who are we to say that they were wrong in a way? Do you know what I mean? They were really using what they had and using what was in nature and what was around them and what was local and making the best of it. And also your story there about the proteins, like, as in, that's the problem, isn't it? Like the education kind of becomes very reductionist, and then people think that there's a carbohydrate food and there's a fat food, and you know,
there's always
a
something that's
protein food.
demonized.
And then also they're never ever generally 100% anything, ever. Do you know? They're always a mix. And like, it's so cringe now thinking back on it. You've just reminded me when I worked with a keto diet at the start of my career. Cringe.
But it works.
The cringe is real.
Yeah,
exactly. I shouldn't be judgmental. But I remember I had an Indian client and she was vegetarian, and explaining to her that, like, you know, she was like, no, but we eat so much beans and lentils. And I was like, they're not good enough. They're not the protein we're talking about. And, you know, yet again, it's like, you know, it's just when you're trying to put everything into such a tight box, you know, whereas obviously legumes and beans and everything, and like the Indian diet and the traditional Indian diet is like brilliant. Do you know what I mean? And then just trying to force it into, you know, rigid amounts of stuff, just, you know, it just doesn't really make sense as such.
And like they've looked at, you know, nomadic, even one of our lecturers I think was doing this study, but they go over every year to, I can't remember what country in Africa, but it's some nomadic people, and they follow them as they're moving from like plains up into the mountains and vice versa. You know, twice a year they move location, and it completely changes what they eat, and because they're going with the seasons and they're living seasonally. But they've looked at their microbiome in their gut, like the whole you know, garden that makes up their gut changes throughout the year as they move location.
Cool.
And you know, I just wonder, is that how we're all supposed to be?
But
that
this
our
is
gut
back
should
to
change with what we're eating in the season.
Especially if we're changing location, maybe, or if the seasons are changing, because it is just that thing. If we had to eat from the land, you know, it's just kind of freaky almost how what grows around you and what occurs around you is the perfect diet for the climate you're currently in. Like, that's it. Mad. It's like it's all done for us. Why are we overthinking it? But now it is the fact that we've tasted everything else, so there's no going back. But I do think, like, it is kind of hilarious in nutrition and marketing and everything that, like, basically if you haven't heard of it, it's good for you. Like, if it's new, it's good for you. If it's
superfood.
If it's grown on a
remote seed that we got from the Amazon jungle.
Exactly.
Now the entire planet needs to put it in their smoothies.
Yeah, exactly. If it's growing on a north-facing mountain in Peru, it must be good for you or something.
Rather than the carrots from the back garden that have just, you know, always grown there. Very humbly and giving us all we need.
This is it. So I'm like, it's technically the opposite. It's technically like you don't need any of the weirdness. Like the closer the better. But yet again, I know once you've tasted stuff you can't go back. And like, I eat everything.
And look, you can't be
I think this is all a lovely theory. We could dip in and
you
out.
You can't be a total purist about it either. Like, we live in the world we live in.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you know, we're actually in the hunger gap at the moment, which I don't think a lot of people even know about anymore, which is, you know, amazing in a way. So like, as you come out of winter, you just start running out of vegetables. And the spring ones you planted in the spring haven't quite started coming up yet. So you get a few weeks around now that's called the hunger gap. And it's because...
Around May, is it?
Yeah, it's kind of April, May. It depends on, I suppose, the time of year or the weather. But where you kind of have a shortage. And that would have been a very important time in the calendar for us at one point. People don't even know that that's a thing anymore. And I mean, that's a great thing.
Why was it important?
I suppose you would have eaten a certain way. You know,
you couldn't have eaten this. Obviously, there was stuff that ran out.
You probably would have been living on a lot of anything you could have kept. You know, anything that could have been preserved. The last bits of the greens, you know, that are growing in the garden, and maybe the starts of the fresh carrots coming up. But it's a specific time, you know, that would have been so important to our ancestors that people don't even know about anymore. You know, it's quite funny when you think about it. And, you know, in a way that's a good thing, because, you know, people aren't starving anymore at this time of year. If you had a bad winter or whatever, you'd have nothing to eat now. You know, we have global food supply now, we're grand. But at the same time, I wonder, are we missing a little bit just in that connection to the season and connection to maybe what our bodies are expecting at this time of year.
And that's a cycle in itself, I suppose. Just like there's times when our body has plenty, and then there's times where it's fallow or whatever, like as in there's not much, there's a bit of a rest going on for our body. And I'd say that's not something that's really considered either. Do you know what I mean?
It's like you eat the same thing for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
Exactly. And that's the thing about being more kind of cognitive led with your diet, that like you decide and it's all education or whatever, rather than kind of feeling or thinking on behalf of your body. Because I think sometimes when you think on behalf of your body, you know, you can be kind of like, geez, I really was throwing in this, that, and the other thing all weekend. You know, it was busy. You know, in my digestive system there was traffic. Constant traffic of literally anything that I was around. And now, like, geez, I suppose it'd be nice to kind of like, you know,
feel just a bit lighter. Or,
like lay low, drink some water, drink some peppermint tea, let my body catch up. Let it tell me now when it's hungry. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of balance as well, isn't it?
Rather than it's 8:00, that's breakfast time, so I should eat, you know, rather than, definitely. Yeah. Like, I think it's just another way of thinking about eating intuitively or tuning into the body and trying to listen to it. And sometimes it makes it easier to eat intuitively if you're more aware of this stuff, because, you know, our society is telling us eat breakfast, lunch and dinner, you know, so our mind tries to control it. But if we're told it's okay to not, then sometimes that allows us to listen to the body. You know? Yeah,
I know. I'm just thinking, and this is like quite anecdotal. This is like N=4. But my German friend Anne, she like in Germany, she said they are kind of more seasonal eaters where she lives anyway. So you only eat rhubarb for 4 weeks of the year. Yeah. And she was like, in Ireland, you can get it all year round. And like, you know, she's not a nutritionist or anything. She doesn't have any major interest, but she was just telling me a story the other day that she baked rhubarb cake for herself, her other German friend, and 2 Irish people, right? And so the 2 Germans got really sick and the 2 Irish didn't.
Oh.
Isn't that really mad?
Because but the rhubarb is out of season.
Yeah. Yeah, and she puts it down to that, because she was like, they were going into it being like, this is weird. Like, why are we eating, you know? So obviously there's a million theories why.
Yeah, you'd wonder why,
I know, but it's just funny because she was like, that's abnormal, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's just interesting. And then, like, I presume you think the same for like the female cycle and the month and stuff?
Totally. Because like I think we talked about that before as well. Because I mean, if you consider the year as, you know, winter into spring, summer, autumn, and that you kind of, your active time is summer, you're kind of preparing in spring, autumn, you're kind of winding down and reflecting on how things went in your active time, you know, and then winter is like turning inwards, reflecting, planning, before you come back out into spring. And, you know, there's some, you know, a lot of people that would argue that it's the same for the menstrual cycle. And I've definitely found it. And where you look at, you know, when you're ovulating is your spring. You know, you're full of beans, like the most social person ever, like massive, like social animal, having the crack. You know, that's when you need to be like going out for parties, going visiting friends, you know, like doing loads. And then you kind of start winding down a little bit as you kind of come in closer to your period. And then when you're menstruating, it's much more internal. You're a lot less interested in socializing. You know, you're a little bit more introverted, you're more reflective, you're more intuitive as you turn inwards, you know, and it's that moving in and out throughout the month, and that you can use that to your benefit, you know, that you can plan your kind of action for when you're hitting ovulation, your spring, your more social stuff, big meetings, if you have a presentation, you know, you can actually kind of start planning your calendar around it if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And then reflecting, and then being like, what do I want to do for the next month? You know, what am I happy with? And a lot of people would argue that like PMS is almost telling us what's wrong that we want to be working on. You know, it's like, it's our body telling us what we need to be reflecting on during our period that we can start acting on, you know, as we come out of it into ovulation, and that we get this cycle every month that we can use.
This is it. There's so much, inwards, there's so much potential, because I love when it's kind of linked with the stages of, I suppose, a female's life. That, what is it, like the maiden and I know the maiden is the youngest one, and then the crone.
Yeah.
Is, you know, so the young one is all like energy and making mistakes and just trying shit and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
say the crone, like post-menopause, is more like reflective and not really taking a lot of physical action, but really wise.
Yeah.
And really reflecting back and learning and stuff like that. And so that like our cycle could be like that too, that like kind of in our period or just after whatever, we're like, you know, there's not a lot of energy to like get going on stuff, but we
Yeah.
can reflect and be wise and that, you know, so
Yeah.
that all stages are equally beneficial.
Yeah, and even food wise as well. You know, we're going to want to eat different things depending on how extroverted or introverted or how intuitive or how, you know, low energy or high energy we're feeling, you know, and that should be changing throughout the month as well, depending on what our body's telling us it wants. You know, we do want different things at different times of the month, and that's cool too, you know, like run with it.
Yeah.
And even actually the 4-season guy, because it was a guy that did that, but he talks about, you know, being in the, you know, spring, summer, autumn, winter of your life, you know, and how, you know, how you at different stages in your life, you know, you might be, you know, all go up to, you know, in your teens up to your 20s, and then you might be, you know, kind of tailing off some activities. And even if you consider, like he talks about exercise, like in the summer is like hiking long distances, you know, doing loads, and then maybe in the winter is more weights related. And when you think about that in terms of your lifespan, like as you get older, weights is better, you know, for building muscles, supporting bone strength,
and
you know,
you're more stationary, like you're more like
as you move in, you know, autumn, winter of your life, that's actually the activities that are better for you then too, you know. It's like
you could really break it up into like any chunk of time, couldn't you?
Yeah.
It's probably the day that everything, but I'm like, it's funny because I think when you don't respect stuff like that, you know, it leads to so much judgment. Because I personally think, anyway, there's nothing wrong with tiredness. The worst thing about tiredness is judging. I shouldn't be tired.
Yeah.
Why am I tired? What's wrong with me? Other people my age wouldn't be tired. Other people are probably doing loads of productive stuff today.
Yeah.
Like, it's the judging of it. And then equally, it's like if your body is in this natural cycle where it does not want to exercise this week, you know, and then you're just forcing yourself or you're judging that's, you know, that's where the pain and suffering comes from, really. And then equally, it's like if you do want to get out there and be social or whatever, and judging yourself on that, like maybe I'm doing too much this week, or maybe, you know, it's always the judgment. I think is the pain and suffering.
It is, yeah, and like I definitely use a lot in my practice, and mostly because of my own experience of that, you know, like chronic activity, and you know, we feel like productivity is valued rather than, you know, rest or introversion or whatever, you know, and self-compassion is loads of really interesting research into self-compassion, but I mean, even just, you know, an N=1 trial of myself.
We do a lot of them.
We do, yeah.
Based on my findings of me.
But I mean, also friends and clients and everything, I've just found like self-compassion is just the key, because if
it
you
stimulates growth, doesn't it?
It does, because like and like there's a really interesting research in the US about this, but they're saying like, you know, self-compassion is 3 things. It's like mindfulness, so it's being aware in the moment of what it is you're feeling, and identifying it. Then it's common humanity, which I really like. So it's like my own experience is my own, but I'm not the only one. There's other people out there feeling the same. It's actually a common thing. Like, it's a normal thing to feel as a human in this situation. Yeah. You know, so it's not like, oh, everyone feels like that, get over it. And it's also not, woe is me. It's just like reconnecting back out. You know, there's other people
really
feeling
important.
This is normal.
Yeah.
What was the third one now that I'm on a roll? Self-kindness. So again, it's like, it's not self-pity. And it's not get over yourself, get on with it. It's somewhere in the middle where it's like, you know, it's okay to feel like this, but let's move forward, let's grow with it, you know. How can we learn from this and moving, you know? So it's sitting with it and also moving forward with it. It's not wallowing and it's not denying to move forward, you know?
That's funny, because I think the second one comes up an awful lot on calls with clients and stuff, and I definitely had a lot of it too when I had disordered eating, because I think it's kind of separation as well. You're kind of like, no one has ever eaten like this.
Yeah.
No one has ever eaten this amount of food in one go.
Yeah.
No one has ever eaten this much junk in 1 week. You know, and it's massive separation. It's like everyone else is over there and I'm this like absolute failure of a creature totally unrelated to them or whatever. So that common humanity is an interesting one, because it is also a little bit of like, get over yourself. Get over yourself.
It's a bit of a reality check.
It is, because it's like you're in an animal's body that's not that different to the other animals around you. Like, do you know, whatever is going on in your head with like,
but it's
this is
catastrophizing.
It is an exceptional and exaggerated. So that's very interesting. And the kindness one as well. Oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
Just that part comes back to what we were saying earlier about eating with community. You know, that community is a huge element to, for other reasons, like, you know, as well, for disordered eating, you know, it's community with others and understanding that you're not abnormal. It's not all you.
Which would be a lovely spin to put on it, you know, because it is amazing how the same situation could be interpreted so differently, because filling station is also 2 words I use a lot every week, just in terms of the judgment people might have if they pick up a coffee and a chocolate bar. And you're like, I don't think you're the only one doing it. Do you know what I mean?
There's a reason why they're at the checkout.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, you could look at that in 2 ways. You could be like, you know, I wasn't meant to buy that today. I'm not meant to buy them in general. Or you could be like, this is part of modern life that sometimes people can dip in and out of, buying a nice thing in the filling station. Like, it doesn't have to be so much judgment and separation and an extreme. It could just be like, you know, it's kind of a community thing to do almost, like, you know, because I was actually on a call outside a filling station the other day, and it's like, you know, if you're parked outside a filling station for any amount of time, the amount of people you'll come out, or you will come out with chocolate and a coffee is an incredible amount of people. So you could choose to say, I'm in that community too sometimes. Sometimes that's a thing that I choose to do too, you know?
Yeah, like I think, you know, when it comes to like, you know, seasonal living and, you know, being more aware of, say, plastic with your food and what's natural and not, it becomes a lot harder to pick up that chocolate bar, because you're like, more plastic, like where was this bloody made, you know? But at the same time, it's balancing that with not having the guilt if you do just want a chocolate bar. It's grand, you know? And like, you know, it's, I think it's doing as much as you can, but giving yourself a break. It's the self-compassion in action
and relative to your ability on the day or in the moment, because sometimes our best one day is going to be different from another best. And I do think like inspired action is the best kind, that you're like, I absolutely have the choice of the chocolate bar. However, today I would be happier with this feeling, or I'd be happier to like fly the flag for the environment or whatever. But like you're not doing it out of willpower or restriction or judgment or rules. You're doing it just because you feel like feeling something else. Or you feel like supporting something else that day. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another thing you were saying that was mad was you were telling me the difference.
That doesn't sound good.
You are ludicrous.
Yes,
you are a real I'm joking. But you were saying about the difference between the EU guidelines on food and America. Like, they're really different or something. You were saying,
and Irish, so, like when you're looking at organic food standards and just normal food standards, actually the EU is much more stringent than the US on like chemicals in your food and healthcare, or sorry, skincare and stuff like that as well. I mean, there are known carcinogens.
Tell us that coconut story. Was it coconut? Your friend bought a cream, or was it like?
Oh, I think it was my cousin in Indonesia. He had an insect repellent, and it said like natural insect repellent, you know. And I was like, he was like, would you like to use some? And I was like, well, what's in it? And he was like, it's natural. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, I don't know, but it should be natural. And I was like, but what's like what? So then I like, you know, I automatically check ingredients and everything. It's just like a habit anyway. And I was like, it said like citronella or something, 2%, and other ingredients. And I was like, what the hell is the other 98%? And he was
Isn't that so freaky?
I don't know, but it's natural, isn't it? And I was like, natural has no definition. at all.
I know.
So what's in it? It could be freaking, acid. It could be anything.
That's nuts.
Could be
Like
petrol,
98% unknown.
Something else. Whereas at least in Europe, it does have to be listed. Granted, there's numbers, and most of us don't know what those numbers mean, but we can look them up if we're that dedicated. But they do. We're not amazing, but we do have better regulation around what's allowed in our food or skincare.
But it is kind of actually, maybe if they use the term natural, or if they do have the consumer thing, that if a food has like 3 ticks on it, we automatically think it's good for us.
Oh, yeah,
so it
the
could
tick
be
could
like
be anything, yeah.
contains asbestos,
Excellent. Gluten and everything. Exactly. It must be good for me and the environment.
So I think it's actually like, well, it's probably the wrong phrase, but like the lady doth protest too much. Like if they really have to like get out there with ticks and natural or whatever,
totally.
That's how you know it's probably not good at all, because I don't know, if you go to a vegetable shop and they just throw your veg into a paper bag, no one's labeling anything with ticks or natural or anything. It obviously is. So
and that's actually, Michael Pollan has a really good book, but one of his like rule of thumb for healthy eating is eat real food, mostly plants. That's it.
I know.
And he's like, real food, like what does real food mean? And he's like, it's usually not in plastic, doesn't have any labels on it. It's just an orange or an apple that you pick up. He does think like preferably from like a farmer's market where you take it from the hand that grew it. He was like, that kind of brings like honor and value back to the food, whereas he was like in a supermarket, who knows how long it's been sitting there, how long it's been transported for, where it came from, how the people were treated who grew it and harvested it. There's like a whole... So he's just like, back to basics. If you know who grew it, grand.
That's it.
And then mostly plants. He was like, it's grand to eat, meat or dairy or whatever, but most of your plate should be veg.
Yeah.
And fruit. And that's kind of his rule.
And just, I suppose, just being clear on what foods do what and what don't. So I kind of think I think it's as simple as that. If a food contains one ingredient, it's nutritional. Yeah. And if it contains many ingredients and it's in a pack, like, I hope you're eating it for taste and experience, because it's, you wouldn't want to be thinking that's going to really grow or help or heal your body in huge ways. And it's like when I'm working with clients and like the first few weeks when they're still trying to figure out my crazy advice, they'd be like, what about this protein bar and what about this protein shake? And I'm like, is it like, are you having like the yummiest taste experience of your life? Is that why you're having it? Because like, I really think if you're going to be eating something like processed and in a bag or a box or whatever, that you are eating that because it is so delicious and nature can't provide it. But like, people are going very wrong if they think that anything that you can get in a bag or a packet or a shelf that could outlive us all is somehow healthy for you.
Them and the cockroaches will be all that's left.
Exactly. Like perfect condition. But like, that's because another thing you reminded me of as well at the start of this was like, I do a lot of like personal development seminars and like a lot of those books and all the rest of it. And I always have to like literally leave the room for the nutrition because it triggers me so much because it's so inaccurate and it's so disordered. It's like maybe this person has like figured it out spiritually, but unfortunately they still have an eating disorder, and it's really annoying. I'm like,
it's the nutritionism again.
Like, and you're like, back off that topic. Like, it's not your topic. And, but actually one book that I was listening to, oh my god, and now I can't remember the name. Love for No Reason, I think. Marcy Shimoff. She's got Happy for No Reason and Love for No Reason.
I'll have to try them.
Yeah, because it was really soothing. And actually, I was like, the nutrition chapter started. I was like, oh, here we go, ready to press skip. And she actually just said, like, just look at food as life force. Yes. Do you know what I mean? There's foods that will have life in them, and you'll feel that life force transferred to you. And then there's foods that won't. And yet again, just from having a disordered eating, history, I know, like, it's never beneficial to judge yourself. And yet again, if you're having something processed, that you're doing it just to join in life in 2022, but you're under no illusions that this is like, this is like massively, this is just a taste experience. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, that's lovely, because you just want to transfer life force. And even, I don't know, is it the Native Americans, or I'm sure probably loads of cultures did it, but like if they were to eat an animal, there'd be huge like gratitude for like the sacrifice and for the transfer of energy. And I'm like, that's such a beautiful way
it's like
of
the
looking
grace
at it.
Before meals, almost. We just, not in a God way, just sort of in a gratitude for what we have available to us, you know. And for, you know, the people that put the time and effort into preparing this food in terms of picking it or growing it, or, you know, an animal that's lost its life for us to be nourished, you know.
Which you could dig deep into that too, because you're also putting your body into a very relaxed state. Do you know what I mean? You're being, it's generally a good energy. You're being grateful, you're being loving, you're being appreciative. You know, your body wouldn't be pumping out that much cortisol in that situation, versus say like, I don't know, doing some Excel sheet at work or like against the clock and like shoveling down your lunch. It's like, like
pausing.
There has to be some difference in digestion.
Definitely.
And metabolism.
Sure, if you're stressed, intense, you know, definitely.
There'd have to be, even to your like gut flora and your intestines and everything. So yeah, kind of a lot of potential there as well. Yeah. But what were you saying about the food? Sorry, because I went off on a tangent. And actually, when you were saying about the skin cream, it reminded me, because the curly haired community, you know, there's a lot of actually natural products that are marketed at that. And then when you're doing it like the proper method, it's like they're actually not natural at all. So that's what
I don't use any of them.
Yeah, exactly. So but the food also, you were saying that our labeling in Ireland is better, is it?
Yeah, well, just food standards in general. Well, they used to be anyway. I haven't checked recently, but the Irish organic certification would have had a higher standard than the European, which would have had a higher standard than the US.
Cool.
Which is just good to know.
Yeah.
Because I do have a friend in the US, and she had, you know, adult acne. She'd always have kind of gotten spots on her chest or her face or whatever. And here, she was able to manage it with food. And then she went over to the US, and it just flared up. She couldn't figure it out. She was like trying to eat more organic. She was trying to get creams, whatever. And she went to like dermatologist to the stars in LA, you know, and was just like, right, sort me out. And he was like, oh, you just need to take steroids and use topical creams. And she was like, but, you know, is there nothing I can do like with food or whatever? And he was just like, no, even the organic food here isn't going to be the way it was back in Ireland. And she was like, could it be, you know, pollutants in the air maybe? And he's like, maybe, but it's probably the food. She was just like, great. It's just hormones, and, you know, it's tough.
Yeah,
and we are getting that way a little bit. Like, we do need to cop ourselves on, I think, you know, in Ireland. But I mean, I don't know enough to kind of comment too much on that. But like, you know, I do think we think we're a lovely green country, you know, but we use an awful lot of fertilizers and pesticides, and we've like, you know, we export meat, like mostly what we grow is meat, you know, like, I mean, everyone should be able to grow just a little bit of, you know, lettuce in the windowsill.
I was telling you that just like before we started this, that like, I've spent a lot of money on education. I can't do anything. Like, I can't repair stuff. Like I can't grow stuff. I'm like fully dependent on society to kind of keep me sheltered and fed and stuff. Like, it's kind of weird, isn't it, that we don't have more skills that way?
I know. And like, I've been trying to learn to forage a little bit, you know, and I asked a friend of mine who's like a herbalist and amazing at foraging. And she was like, just start, you know, like I was like, what book should I get? What course should I be doing? You know, total like academic. And she was like, just start, just get out there sort of idea. And I was like, that's actually a really good point. And I think it's the same for everything. And it's the same for like eating seasonally, for changing how you eat, for being more sustainability aware, for, you know, intuitive eating, for starting to fix stuff in your house. You know, it's just to start. It's just to have the self-compassion and just give it a go.
And there's a certain way of starting that, because like you say, the self-compassion, you know, like that could fuel it.
Perfect.
Do you know what I mean? Because I just think as well, something that really works for me, and I think really helped me get out of my disordered eating, is FOMO. Yeah. Like, I hate missing out.
Yeah.
And like, say, with binge eating and stuff, I felt it was really unfair that I had to do my job hungover, bloated, feeling really gross, erratic energy levels, when the other girls had to do the same job but had tons of energy. Like, that's not fair. And equally, say, with advertising, you know, M&S or whoever saying like, if you've had a shit day, buy all our food and you'll feel amazing. and then you do it and you don't feel amazing and you're like, that's not fair, I was told I'd feel amazing. Do you know what I mean? But equally, I just think that if we've been controlling with our body and we've been too maybe academic about it or militant about it or
in our heads too much
about it, and you know, same rules apply to every day of the month and every day of the year, like just to be open to the opportunity that, you know, maybe we've been missing out, like maybe we could feel better, maybe our body does have this hidden cycle that we never listen to, and also just the whole idea that we've our own little unique cycle, you know, and that like maybe trying to listen to that and having a kind of, I suppose, more sensitive gauge to what feels good to us and what kind of doesn't, without judgment, just more trial and error.
That's it. I think like for everything, it's like, it's just having a go, like just starting without needing it to be perfect, or, you know, like if you want to start eating a little bit more seasonally, just like Google what's in season today, you know, or go down to a local farmer's market.
We are kind of shafted though, aren't we? Like if we were doing that, would it just be like straight turnips and cabbage every day? That would be so hard to go back to.
No, you'd probably like in the summer especially, my God, there's loads, you know, and in autumn actually there's loads of different variety. And you know, again, you don't have to do it 100%. And plus we don't need a hunger gap. We don't just starve because we had a bad winter. You know, we can't import food and we can't eat whatever. It's just to try to, you know, we don't have to do it 100%. That's it. It's just like what's a typical vegetable or fruit that's in season at the moment, and just try and incorporate that this week.
And the other thing is, I suppose, like seasonal eating in the 80s would have been boil whatever you see. Whereas
we weren't
now
great in the whole culinary skills, like
whereas now, you know, there's more options and
spiralizers and whatever you want to do with them. Like,
so that's an opportunity too. But I think we've put the world to right. I think we've covered it all.
I think it's just like remembering. I think we consider ourselves separate to nature. Is probably where we're all going wrong, you know. And we're not. We're a part of it, and we just need to remember that. Like we are nature, and nature is us, and we just need to reestablish that connection and try and remember by tuning into ourselves. Like our bodies know it, and just maybe trying to educate ourselves a small bit more then on what is seasonal, you know.
Yeah, it's funny actually because, you know, there's this guy on Gaia, you know, Gaia is like the hippie Netflix, and his name is Stefano something. Anyway, he's mad, but he has this theory that like the planet is the being and we are cells.
Yeah, so like you could consider it that way,
Yeah, so you might be a kidney cell or a cell in the kidney. I might be a cell in the eye. So I you know, it's really pointless for me to try and be like you.
Yeah.
You know, because I'll be just doing my job less well.
Yeah.
The more I try and be like you.
Yeah.
And then also it kind of, I think, because you know the way sometimes the weather can, like my parents would say it all the time that, you know, sure, of course we've no energy. The weather is heavy. You know what I mean? So in a way that we're at the mercy of kind of the planet or the seasons or whatever, but it's kind of a nice way to look at it too.
It is, yeah. And like I love looking at, like, you know, I was went on a forest bathing thing in West Cork recently, and you know, I just was like looking at the moss on the trees, and you know, you're like, oh, it's so furry, you know, but then when you go up to it, there's all these little bugs living in it, like it's its own little forest, you know. And
there's
like
a lot going on
if you just
there.
consider the scale, like maybe we are just, you know, the bugs and the moss in a big ecosystem.
For all we know. Yeah, exactly. But I think in a way that kind of weirdly takes the pressure off that you have to control everything and figure everything out. Like that's the thing. I think like the opposite of control is trust.
Yeah.
So like if my body wants to eat more today, if I've like had my dinner and I'm still starved, I trust that's for a really good reason.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then equally it's like if you're not hungry yet, but you know, it's lunch, but you really, really, really don't want your lunch. It's like, you know, you trust that there's some wisdom that you don't actually ever need to figure out.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you don't need to intellectualize it all. Like,
No, exactly. Okay, so thanks so much for coming on, Katie.
Thanks for having me. First podcast.
Woo-woo! Okay, and thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you next time. Mwah.